Yeah, just trying one thing. I'm quite new to this. All right. First, good morning to everyone. And thanks for joining us. Some people are quite new over here. And some faces I've seen on pictures. And I'm glad to see them over here. All right. I prepared a presentation throughout the whole discussion, shia, class, whatever you want to call it. So you won't be seeing my face too much, just in the small corner. I hope it's going to make the discussion more pleasant. So let's start. So the topic is Assyria versus Judea. Assyria versus Yehuda. There is a Sephardi minhag, which everyone can now guess the idea of the minhag, is to say Hallel in Shul, Pesach evening. Some do not have the minhag, and some do have the minhag. The minhag is actually codified in Shulchan Aruch, as one can see over here. Belail Rishon Shel Pesach, on the first day of Pesach, one finishes Hallel B'tzibah, Ben'ime. It's actually an interesting word the Mechaber uses. Ben'ime, you have to say it in a nice way. The Vrocha was a Vrocha at the beginning and the end. And the same applies to the second night of the two Yom Tovim of the Yom Tovim Shel Gulius. The Remu, well, he says we do not have this custom. We do not say Hallel at evening in the Shil. It is interesting to note that in the Hasidic courts, there's a saying that when the Remu wrote this passage, he was actually crying. What a shame we do not have this nice custom of saying Hallel in Shul. Now, the discussion today is going to be, why do we say Hallel in Shul? But let's continue a bit. We have now Minhag Sephardi, and we have Minhag Ashkenaz. There is a Ba'ai Haitev. The Ba'ai Haitev adds, V'chain hi al pi kabula svari. This is also the custom of the Ariya Kodesh. Now, Hasidim say Hallel as well. Let me just add another few. Sorry, 1 second. So Hasidim also have this custom of saying Hallel. Now, it is common knowledge that Hasidim daven Nisach Sephardi. But I believe, and it's my personal opinion, one can argue with it, that Hasidim do not daven Nisach Sephardi. And it wasn't the Hasidim who actually introduced the idea of changing from Ashkenaz to Sephardi. Now, I'll give my reason. The Hasidim actually daven a Nisach called Nisach Ari. The Nisach from the Arizal. The Nisach from the Arizal is a mixture between Ashkenaz and Sephardi. It took some parts of the Seder of Nisach Ashkenaz and some parts of the Seder in Nisach Sephardi. Like the Shemon Esrei, the first part is completely Nisach Ashkenaz, and the second part is Nisach Sephardi. I don't know why. Obviously, this is what he saw fit, whatever he did. But what I did notice is two things. One is that the Siddur of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, is actually Nisach Ashkenaz. It is not Nisach Sfat. Whilst we found, on the contrary, we find in Krakow, in the times of the Megala Mikis, which is 100 years before the Baal Shem Tov, there were 8 shuls, 8 synagogues, and 4 of them davened Nisach Sephard. And also the famous close in Brody also davened Nisach Sephard. And we know of many more Rabbunim, like Rav Nosson Adler, who were Bala Mekibel, and they all davened Nisach Sephard. Nisach Ari, which gives me the idea that Talmidei Hashem, who actually were very involved in studying, learning Kabbalah, saw fit to daven Nisach Ari, and this is how evolved the Hasidim daven Nisach Ari. Nothing to do with Nisach Sephard. Anyway, Hallel, Hasidim recite Pesach even in Shul, as mentioned in the Mechaber. The source, obviously, if one wants to see the source of this custom, one has to open the Torah, and in the Torah we find, as one can read over here, that the minig is, the places, the minig is to say Hallel in Shul, B'tzibah, and it gives a reason, so we do not have to say the Bruch of Hallel at the Hagude. The reason why we do not want to say a Bruch at the Hallel on the Hagude is because that we split Hallel. We have a meal in the middle of the Hallel. Therefore, one does not really, some of the Rishonim say that one should not say Hallel with a Bruch in such case. And the Torah brings the source for it, Masechta Sofrim, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehudik. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehudik says, 18 days and 1 night one finishes Hallel, and in Gulis, where we are, is 21 days and 2 nights. This is the source of saying Hallel, and of saying Hallel in the Shul before the Seder with a Bruch. The Beis Yosef adds that this is the minig of Sephard. Minig b'nai Sephard lekroise b'tzibah. We read it in b'tzibah, and we make the bruche as mentioned in Masechta Sofrim. Give me a second, because another person wants to come in. Here's a clip out of Masechta Sofrim of one of the editions. One can see, one finishes, it's a list of all the days one says Hallel, we finish Hallel on Chanukah, and we finish Hallel, and in the middle you can see in the 5th line, Reb Shimon ben Yehudik. Domer Reb Shimon ben Yehudik, 18 days, and 1 night one says Hallel. Now, let's summarize what we have just seen. Hallel on Pesach evening. The minig Sephard is to say Hallel. This minig was actually adopted by the Arizal. It is codified in Shulchan Aruch. It is mentioned in the Torah, and the sources brought in Masechta Sofrim. The author of this halacha is a Tana called Reb Shimon ben Yehudik. Now, this last line we have to remember, because we're going to get back to it at the end of our discussion. Now, let's turn to different section of Pesach night. It's Sancheiriv in the Haggadah. We have here a picture of the Rothschild Aguda. I allowed myself to print a copy this year, and we read over here a line which we say in the Zmiris after the Seder. So afterwards, drink the 4th kos. I think that's the kos in most places. We sing the Zmiris and Kilanue, Adehi, and we have these 2 poets we say. So we have here a line, he writes, Mechuraif lenoifeif evi, v'ivashtu pegurav balaylu. We'll soon explain and translate what this means. And the second night, we have another period, and again, we refer to Sancheiriv and his besieging Yerushalayim when Chesky HaMelech was there. We'll see soon. Seruf Sorfi Mishmana Fil Valid Bikadikot Pesach. Oida Yom Benev Lamoid Ad Ku Oinas Pesach. We mentioned the nest of Sancheriv, which happened to Sancheriv when he put seed in Yerushalayim. To understand what the connection is, this story and Hallel, we need to understand thoroughly the story of Sancheriv. The story of Sancheriv is mentioned in 4 places. In 4 places. One is in Sefer Yeshaya, which is authored by Yeshaya Novi himself. The second one is in Sefer Meluchim, volume 2, and it is Sefer Meluchim was written by Yirmiyah Novi. Now, Yirmiyah Novi lived much later. He lived at the times of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. The third source. All right. So one is in Sefer Yeshaya, one is Sefer Meluchim. The next one is in Divrei Yomim, written by Ezra Sofer, who lived even later in the times of the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. And the fourth is in Sefer Ben Sira, written by Shema Ben Sira, who lived even after Ezra Sofer. All the sources we have in this presentation are based on these first three sources. So I didn't write from where I took each verse. The story of Sancheriv. But to understand the story of Sancheriv, we need to understand who Cheskia was, and we need to understand the background of Yisrael at the time, and we need to understand the background of the Assyrian kings till we get to Sancheriv. So we'll go through in short all of these 3 backgrounds so we can get a wide picture of what's going on. In Chemish we find the Pusik where Hashem says about the mitzvah of setting a king. If after you've entered the land of Hashem, that Hashem your God has assigned to you, and taken possession of it and settle in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. This is a very interesting approach how a mitzvah is set in the Torah. Usually it's just a command. You do like this and you do like this. Here it comes with like a question. You're going to come and you're actually going to request, I want to have a king. Hashem says, Soim tusim aleich melech, you shall be free to set a king over yourself. It is interesting because this is exactly how it happened. We go forward in time to the times of Shmuel Hanovi, and this is how it works. They escaped, and all the elders of Israel assembled and came to Shmuel at Ramah, and they said to him, you have grown old, and your sons have not followed your ways. Therefore appoint a king for us to govern us like all other nations. Shmuel was very displeased. And Hashem replied, and Shmuel went and he asked Hashem what to do. And Hashem told him, he to demand to the people. And as we know, Shmuel set the first king, the first monarch of Israel. The first king was Shaul ben Kish. Here we have a small tree I made of the kings of Israel. It starts with the kings of United Israel. And we have Shaul, David, and Solomon, Shlomo Melech. And then we can see that the monarch split in 2. On the left, we have the Judean king. And on the right, we have the kings of Israel. The Judean kings are all descendants of King David. And in Israel, there are quite a few monarchies. But we can see, you note this red axis and the blue checks. The red axis were bad kings, wicked kings, and the blue checks are the kings where Hashem says that you are righteous kings. And in the center we have at the bottom over here we have the Assyrian kings. It's at about the time when they lived with their contemporaries. We have, which we are going to discuss. On the left, we have Achaz and his son Cheskia. On the right, we're going to discuss Menachem, Pekach, and Hoshea. And in the center, we have Tiglath-Pileser, also known as Pul, Shalmaneser, Sargon, and Sancheriv, the protagonist of this story. He was later killed by his two sons, Saretze and Adramelech, and his son Esarhaddon was his follow-up king. That's about the picture how it looks. So, kings of Judea, of Yehuda, and Israel. 3 kings were of the united tribes of Israel, that is Shaul, David HaMelech, and Shlomo HaMelech. Yehuda had 12 kings up to King Cheskia, but only 6 of them were righteous. 6 of them were wicked. Israel had altogether 20 kings. The last king of Israel was a contemporary to Cheskia. Only 1 of them was righteous. So we have an idea of how the Yidden, the Jews, behaved in Israel for the last few hundred years. With such a variety of kings, it was hard to say that the Jews were righteous. It was very hard to be righteous when the leader of the Jews were not really righteous. And well, Hashem has plans. Hashem has plans for the people who do not go in his ways as he told us to do. And twice Hashem tells us what he plans to do, how he's going to punish us. In Parashat Bechakosai, if you despise this, you disobey me, and you remain hostile to me, I will make the land desolate, so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled by it. And you I will scatter amongst the nations, and I will unsheath this word against you. Your land shall become a desolation, and your cities a ruin. Same thing applies in the Teuchache in Parshas Kisuvay, in Chemish Devurim. Hashem will drive you and the king you have set over you to a nation unknown to you or your fathers, where you shall serve other gods of wood and stone. The Jews in Israel knew very well what's in for them if they don't behave. Exile was long overdue. But Hashem has patience, and he waited in 1 year, another year, perhaps another king, and perhaps he will not have to do what he promised to do. We come to the year 3200 Anno Mundi, to the year of creation. Now, according to our calculation, it's the year 461 BCE. According to the conventional chronology, it's 716 BCE. Cheskia, the king of Yehuda. When he was appointed king, as mentioned before, his father Achaz was a wicked king, but he was a righteous king. And change from wickedness to righteousness showed itself in the very first day he came to the throne. Chazal tell us, that's a lot, that's another one. Chazal tell us he dragged the bone of his father Achaz on a bed of ropes, and it did not afford him the respect due to a king, to show the whole of the Jewish nation that he is not wicked, he is righteous, and no one should even think otherwise. And on another occasion, Chazal tell us, Rabbi Yochanan tells us, on that day, Cheskia's father died. Daylight lasted 2 hours. 10 hours shorter than the standard day, so that a wicked Achaz would be buried hurriedly without the pomp typically accorded to kings. What did Cheskia do to ensure Torah study? asked the Gemara in a different place. He inserted a sword in the entrance of the study halls and said, anyone who does not engage in Torah study shall be stabbed with this sword. As a result, they searched from Dan to north to Be'esheva in the south and did not find an Engaramus, did not find an Amhuretz. Means to say there was no army anymore, no working people, everyone went to Koilel. And on different occasions, the Gemara says something very interesting. The Holy One, blessed be He, sought to designate King Cheskia as the Mashiach and to designate Sancherib and Assyria respectively as Gog and Magog, which means at the time of Cheskia, the situation of Klal Yisrael was so special, it was a time for the Geula. But the Midas Adin, as the Gemara explained, stood in the way of it. So we have an idea how righteous Cheskia was. Now let's meet some Assyrian kings. The first Assyrian king mentioned in Tanakh is a king called Pul. The king Pul is actually a nickname for the next Assyrian king mentioned in Tanakh, called Tiglath-Pileser. And as we see here in Tanakh, King Pul of Assyria invaded the land of Israel, and Menachem, the king of Israel, gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver that he might support him and strengthen his hold in the kingdom. Menachem had to pay a tribute to the king of Assyria. The next king we meet is the very same Pul with a new name, Tiglath-Pileser, and he meets the king Pekach. Pekach was actually the king after Menachem was Pekachia, his son, and Pekach killed Pekachia and took over the throne. And we read, in the days of the king Pekach of Israel, King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria came and captured a list of towns, and he deported the inhabitants to Assyria. This is the start of the famous exile of the Assyrians Ashvutim. As Hashem told the Jews, if you would not go in my ways, I will just disperse you. The punishment started to come. And the next king, Pekach, was killed by Hoshea, the last king of the Israel kingdom. And in his days, the next king of Assyria, Shalmaneser, King Shalmaneser, marched against him, and Hoshea became his vessel and paid him tribute. The next king on the list is Sancherib. At this time, the 6th year of Cheskia's year of Cheskia's kingdom, came as we call it, the final solution to the Yidden, the Jews of the whole of Israel. That means the 10 tribes of Israel. But the king of Assyria caught Hoshea in an act of treachery, and he had sent envoys to the king of So, because Hoshea had sent envoys to the king of So of Egypt, and he had not paid the tribute to the king of Assyria as in the previous years. And the king of Assyria arrested him and put him in prison. Then the king of Assyria marched against the whole land. He came to Samaria, which is Shomron, the capital, and besieged it for 3 years. And in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He deported the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Halach and Chabor and the river Gozan, the towns of Media. The whole of the Assyrians Ashvutim were all out of Israel. To understand what happened and how this sending people to exile and what did it do to the places which he emptied out, we go forward 600 years. We go forward into a time of the Tanuim, known the day, a very special day called That Day. What's that day? The day when they appointed Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah as the head of the academy. Yeah, we know Pesach. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah is quite a protagonist in the Haggadah. He was appointed at the head of the academy when he was only 18 years old, very young. The Mishnah tells us an interesting story. On that day, Yehuda, an Ammonite convert, came and stood before them, before all the rabbis of the academy, as well as Susi, who was there as well. And he said to them, "Do I have the right to enter into the assembly?" And that's a translation from Steinsaltz. It means basically, can Ammonite ger actually be Megaya? Rabbi Gamliel, who was the previous Nusi, and he lost his seat to Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, said to him, "You are forbidden." Rabbi Yeshua, who was the Av Beis Din, said, "You are permitted." Rabbi Gamliel said to him, "The Pusik says, an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the assembly of the Lord, of Hashem, even to the 10th generation. So how can you say he is permitted to come in? He is clearly forbidden." Rabbi Yeshua said to him, "But are the Ammonites and the Moabites still in their own territory? Sancheriv, the king of Assyria, has long since come up and mingled all the nation." This is a famous saying that Sancheriv came and he mingled all the nations. No one knows his origin. Someone who lives in Ammon is not really an Ammonite. He's from a different country. Therefore, he's allowed. Therefore, they permitted him to enter the assembly. To understand what Sancheriv did, we're going to see now something called, perhaps some are familiar with it, it's called Sancheriv's Annals. Sancheriv Annals is basically a prism, six-sided tube, in which he wrote all his wars he had against all the countries around him, in which he won. Obviously, the wars he lost is no mention, as we will see. He wrote many prisons, and he put them in different locations. 3 of them survived completely, some only pieces of it. One is the Taylor prison here in London. The other one is the Oriental Institute prison in Chicago. And the third one is the Jerusalem prison in Israel. I copied the text of a section of the prisons, and the computer is going to run it for you. I'm going to try to read it, but if you want, you can read it for yourself. The first column is introduction of Sancheriv, and where he praises himself. He gives himself, basically writes all his deeds, like someone who writes his own matzayve. Reads like this: Sancheriv, the great king, the mighty king, king of the world, king of Assyria, king of the 4 quarters, the wise shepherd, the favorite of the great, guardian of the right, lover of justice, who lends support, who comes to the aid of destitute, who performs pious acts, perfect hero, mighty man, first of all, prince, is the powerful one who consumes the insubmissive, who strikes wicked in the thunderbolt. And as you can see, it's all about him. The god Ashur, the great mountain, the unrivaled kingship has entrusted me, and above all those who dwell in palaces has made my weapons powerful. From the upper sea, it's all about him, how big and how mighty he is. I'm sorry, I'm running again because we had to enter another participant. So whoever didn't manage to read it the first time can read it the second time. This is how his prison starts, in where he says all about himself. And then he continues about his campaigns against various countries. And it starts with his first campaign. His first campaign, as it reads, my first campaign accomplished the defeat of Merodach Baladan, mentioned in Tanakh. king of Babylonia, together with his army of Elam, his ally, in the plain of Kish. In the midst of the battle, he deserted his camp and he escaped alone, so he saved his own life. As you can read, he just took all his, whatever he left over, he took it and went and marched into his palace, and took everything he found in his palace, his people, his gold, his silver, everything, took his slaves. And so he did also take and conquered many cities of this whole area. And he continues on his way, on the return, way home. Another few cities he conquered, all of them 208,000 people, and the animals, he all took his booty and carried off to Assyria. And then he says about tribute they received from other kings who were afraid he should not put siege on them. And he finishes this campaign. The warriors of the Hirami, wicked enemies, are cut down with the sword. None escape. Their corpses are hung on stakes surrounding the city with them. That district I recognized, 1 ox, 10 lambs, and everything it took with. One reads this complete prison, gets an idea of how Nebuchadnezzar, how Sancherib worked. He came to a city. Did you just, if he paid, the city paid the tribute he asked? Well, he just left the city and took his tribute. If the king denied the tribute, he would replace the king. If the people of the city would comply with him, Sancherib, a city where no one would comply with him, he would just go out and take the city. The people he would send to exile, or he would just kill them, as you've just read in the current campaign. In the next campaign, we meet Menachem, the king of Israel, of paying tribute to Sancherib. And we meet another few campaigns. In the third campaign, he went against the Hittite land, which is Eretz Chais, which is the whole section of Israel and Syria. And he had a campaign in Sidon, as you can see over here. And here he mentions Menachem from Shomron. All these people received, all of them, numerous presents, and they have a tribute they brought before me for the 4th time and kissed my feet. Then he continues about the king of Ashkelon, in which he took prisoner, and actually, if I'm not mistaken, he sent him. Sorry, no, it's the king Paddy, which is sent to Cheskia in prison, to keep him in prison. And then he mentions a war with the Egyptian. We'll come back soon with this war from the Egyptians. And as it says, he captured the Egyptian and he won this battle. The next section is, let's find out. Till now, we found out, we had basically an idea how Israel situation was. The 10 Assyrians were all in exile. We have a pretty idea of how Sancherib dealt with his wars. And well, let's meet Yerushalayim, how they prepare for the battle with Sancherib. Cheskia Melech Yehuda finds out what's going on, and he sees Cheskia comes, and obviously, if Sancherib comes up to Jerusalem, he obviously has him in mind, because the rest of the whole of Israel he took already care of. So he does 2 things. One thing he does is he redirects Gihon River. The second thing he does, he reinforces the city walls. Let's see what happens with Gihon River, something very, very interesting. The Pusik says, after these faithful deeds, After his faithful deeds, King Sanherib of Assyria invaded Yehuda and encamped against its fortified towns with the aim of taking them over. Chesky knows very well what's in it for him. Pusik says, right? When Chesky saw that Sanherib had come, intent on making war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officers and warriors about stopping the flow of the spring outside the city, and they supported him. A large force was assembled to stop all the springs and the wadi that flowed through the land, for otherwise they thought the king of Assyria would come and find water in abundance. And the opposite is true as well. The city inside will be lost without water. Now, outside of Harabais, that's between Harabais and Harazaism, there is a valley called Nachal Kidron. We have here an old Aguda called Leibnik Aguda. And there's a picture over here from the Beis HaMikdash, and we can see the river Kidron, the river Gichon, is actually flowing in the front of it, as you can see over here. Now, it is this river which the Cheskia HaMelech had an issue with, because if he is locked inside and the Assyrian forces are outside, they get the water of the river and he not. And Yerushalayim, the Yerushalayim is on a mountain, so the river does not go up, it goes down. What did he do? He did a marvelous thing which is up to date. It is not understood how it is possible to. It's not understood how it can be done today, let alone can be done more than 2,000 years ago. This is an image of Yerushalayim around his time. And there is a cutout, one can see the river was flowing outside of the city walls, as one can see right in the picture. And then there's a cutout where they diverted the river in a jiggly way. And Cheskia had no time. He had no time to start on one end and come out the other end. So they started digging from both ends. Now, if they started digging in a straight line, well, one can understand perhaps how they met. But digging from two ends and going in a non-clear straight line, it's nearly impossible for them to meet. And obviously, they did meet. At the center where they met, here's a picture of inside the Gichon River that flows from more than 2,000 years. And the place where they met, there was a plaque. Now, this is a replica. The original plaque is now in a museum in Turkey. But at the place, they put a replica, and it reads as follows. It's written in Hebrew script. Now, I cannot read Hebrew script. Here's a translation. Excavation of the tunnel has ended, and this is the story of the tunnel. While the diggers were hitting, the axes were against each other. They're going from two ends against each other. While 3 cubits left to cut, the voices of men were heard as they called their counterpart. There was Zada. Zada refers to a word, Zion, Dalet Hai, and we do not know what it refers to. In the rock, on the right, and on the day of the tunnel being finished, the stonecutters struck towards their counterparts, axe against axe, and water flowed from the source to the pool for 1,200 cubits. And 100 cubits was the height over the head of the stonecutters, which means they dug the tunnel 100 cubits under Yerushalayim. This is how Yecheskia redirected the Gichon River from its source to the other end of the mountain from Yerushalayim. So the water stayed for the citizens, and when he comes, they are stuck without water. Now, although Cheskia never did it, he did find that some people did not like it. Mishnah in Masechtas Yadayim says, he sealed the waters of the upper Gihon stream, diverting its waters into the city by means of a tunnel, and it did not concede to him. The Chachumim did not concede to him. The Meiri explains why, because he harmed the local populace in the process and should have relied upon Hashem. But some claim he did something good. Reb Nusen Bavli writes in Ovest Reb Nusen, he stopped up the waters of Gihon, and his decision was in accordance with the will of the omnipresent God. So we have here a difference of opinion. Chazal, did he do something good, or perhaps was it not accordance to what he was supposed to do? This is one thing what it did. Actually, in Tanakh we find that, and this is actually the opinion of Reb Nusen is based on a pasuk in Tanakh, where one of the things Cheskia did is mentioned that he did divert the Gihon as a special thing he did. The next thing what it did is he acted with vigor, rebuilding the whole breached wall, raising towers on it and building another wall outside it. He fortified the middle of the city of David and made a great quantity of arms and shields. Basically, Cheskia prepared himself for a war with the Assyrian king of Sancherib. Here are remnants of the wall today of what Cheskia built. He appointed battle officers over the people, then gathering them to him in the square of the city gate. Now, looking around at what happened to all the other kings who went out to war with Sancherib, one can say most of them lost and were sent to exile or killed. So one wonders, why did Cheskia prepare for war? Why didn't they just try and settle and giving Sancherib a tribute? So let's meet the Battle of Lachish. In the 14th year of King Cheskia, King Sancherib of Assyria marched against all the fortified towns of Yehuda and he seized them. Afterward, King Sancherib of Assyria sent his officers to Yerushalayim, he and all of the staff being at Lachish, with the message to King Cheskia of Yehuda and to all people of Yehuda who were in Yerushalayim. What was this message? Well, need to find out. Looks like something is missing from this presentation over here. Cheskia basically sent to Sancherib a tribute. He sent a message to Sancherib and he asked him, "What do you want from me?" Yeah. I just want to see what's going on. Oh, okay. Sorry, let's skip this one. And first, let's see what happened in Lachish. Then we'll discuss the tribute of Cheskia. All right. So, what happened in Lachish? What happened in Lachish actually is not mentioned in Nach. It's just mentioned Sancherib came to Lachish. As a matter of fact, it's also not mentioned in Sancherib's annals. He does not write anything about Lachish, as far as I know. But something major happened in Lachish. And to find out what happened in Lachish, we need to go to Nineveh. This is a scene of Nineveh. And in Nineveh, we need to go to the palace of Sancherib. But whatever we're trying to find in his palace is not really there. It is in the British Museum. And in the British Museum, there is reliefs of what happened in Lachish. He didn't write what happened to Lachish. He actually made scenes out of it. He had a whole hall, a room in his palace dedicated to his battle in Lachish. Sorry, another man wants to come in. All three, I don't know, for 3 or 4 walls of his room. I'm not sure because I can't go to British Museum. I'm a Kohen, and there is bones over there from dead people. So all I can see is what I find online, and one can see, if one looks, it's not really the time to study this image. One can give a whole lecture on this image itself. But there's many images of the war, of how he killed the people, how he tortured them. Here we have a corner of the wall. On the left-hand side at the bottom, you can see where people are tortured. And this is a corner of this relief, which is now here in London. It was a heavy battle. And this is the place where it took place. This is the Lachish now in Israel. The people of Lachish had a tragic, tragic end. And these were obviously the Jews of Lachish. But it seems that the Jews had an option, because we know of one Jew who survived Lachish, as we will soon see. What is left? We are now in Israel. The Assyrian, they have all been exiled. The monarch of Israel, sorry for the spelling mistake, is abolished. The cities of Yehuda around Yerushalayim is now conquered by Sancherib. King Cheskia, as we know, was terribly sick in these days. And what is left is only its capital, Yerushalayim. One can imagine living now in Yerushalayim would be very, very worrisome, because they knew very well they're the last city standing of the country. Chizkiah Melech was very sick, and in these days, Chizkiah saw one thing: he has to go out and he has to give courage to the left Yidden in Yerushalayim. And the words which Chizkiah says are such beautiful words. He tells them like this: be strong and of good courage. Do not be frightened or dismayed by the king of Assyria, or by the horde that is with him, for we have more with us than he has with him. What does he say? What does he have? With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is Hashem our God, to help us and to fight our battles. Now, obviously, in such a situation, Cheskia sees no other way, and he decides, let's put away war, and let's do the good way. Let's pay tribute to the king Sancherib. Perhaps we can get rid of him. Cheskia pays 30 talents of gold and 300 talents of silver, hoping this is actually the amount of gold and silver Sancherib asked from Cheskia to pay to him, and he pays it. From where does it take all this fun, all this money, all this gold and all this silver? He doesn't have it. So the king of Assyria imposed upon Cheskia Yehuda the payment of 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. What does he do? Cheskia gives him all the silver that was on hand in the house of Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash and in the treasuries of the palace. And he does even something even more weird. At that time, Cheskia cut down the doors and the doorposts of the Beis HaMikdash of Hashem, which King Cheskia had overlaid with gold and gave them to the king of Assyria. He's literally left with nothing, hoping that this act will save him from the king. But it's interesting to note, although he had no other option, the Chachamim were not happy with it. He cut off the doors of the sanctuary and sent them to the king of Assyria, and they did not concede to him, because he thereby demeaned the temple. And as we'll soon see, it did not help him too much. It is not case closed. Next is enter Rav Shakeh, as I always say. And now is a very style to title everyone with the title Rav. The first Rav was actually Rav Shakeh. He was a Yid, a Jew. As Chazal say, he was a mummeh, someone who did not keep to the Torah. This is an image of Rav Shakeh. Now Rav Shakeh was sent by Sancherib to try to convince the people of Yerushalayim to give themselves over to Sancherib, or give out their king. And Rav Shakeh came and he gave a speech. He gave, as we can say, a very disgusting speech. He opened his mouth against Hashem. And I'm not going to bring the copy of the speech, but anyone who opens the Tanakh and Meluchim or Yeshaya can see his speech over there. The Cheskia Melech sent out a delegation to meet Rav Shakeh, and they asked him not to speak in Jewish, in Lushan Yehidus. They asked him to speak in Aramaic, because they did not want that the Yidden in Yerushalayim should hear what he has to say. But he did not budge. He said, no, I want to speak the language that everyone in Yerushalayim should understand what I say and what I want from them. Cheskia Melech gets back the words of Rav Shakeh. He tears his clothes and he does not know what to do next. As we see in the Psikim here, the king of Assyria sent Tartan, Rabsaris, and Rav Shakeh from Lachish with a large force to the king Cheskia of Yerushalayim. And the question asked is, why? If Cheskia sent you this tribute you asked for, why go to Yerushalayim? Why put a conquer? It is this fellow over here, perhaps, which is the cause why Sancherib changed his mind and he decided to put siege on Yerushalayim, because he realized that Cheskia is not here with a peaceful intention. He's actually here to go out to war with him. This fellow over here is a person called Tirhaka in Tanakh, or Tahaka in Egyptian sources. He was the king of Egypt, or Kush. Kush is right next to Egypt, and sometimes, So what happened is Cheskia called the king, this Tirhaka, to come out to help him in his war against Assyria, and he came out to Cheskia. But Sancherib found out about it, and he caught him on his way to Yerushalayim, as we will soon see what it did to him. In the meantime, Sancherib sends a message again to Yerushalayim about expecting them to just give themselves over to the Eden. In the meantime, Cheskia sent a message to Yeshaya Novi. What is he to do now? And the message comes back: do not be frightened by the words of blasphemy against me that you have heard from the minions of the king of Assyria. I will delude him He will hear rumor and return to his land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his land, as we will soon see. In the meantime, Sancherib goes out as war against the Egyptian king, as mentioned before. He captures the Egyptian king and his army. In the Medrash we see he ties his army, he brings him to Yerushalayim, and he tied his whole army outside while he was in Yerushalayim. This is like an image in which they copied the relief of Sancherib in war. And back to Yerushalayim. While Sancherib is coming to Yerushalayim, he sends a message. He sends a written message to the people of Yerushalayim, in which he writes, "Do not let your God, on whom you are relying, mislead you into thinking that Yerushalayim will not be delivered into the hands of the king of Assyria. You yourself have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, how they have annihilated them. Can you escape? You're not different. Where the nations that my predecessors destroyed, Gozan, Haran, Retzef, and the best, and all the other towns saved by their gods," he writes in this letter. Where is the king of Hamas, and the king of Arpad, and the king of Lair, Farvoyim, Haina, and Eva? Cheskia takes this letter he received from Sancherib, and he goes out to the Beis HaMikdash, and he lays these letters down to Hashem, and he prays to Hashem to help him out in the situation. The answer comes from Yeshaya Hanavi, in which he says, "Assuredly thus said Hashem concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not enter the city, he shall not shoot an arrow at it, or advance upon it with a shield, or pile up a siege mount against it. He shall go back by the way he came, he shall not enter the city, declares Hashem." Calming words from the prophet Yeshaya. And he finishes off, "I will protect and save the city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David." All right, so this is what happened all before. Now we're coming to the main day, the day of the main action, Erev Pesach, 3:14 a.m. Now we know the heathen this day were very worried. Yeah, they heard the words of Hashem, but still, a human being is a human being. The Rabbi Reb Mendel of Remenov, one of the Hasidic great rabbis, said, gives an idea what happened that day. He said that don't know why it's, sorry. Said that they were very worried, and they did not know if they were supposed to shecht the Korban Pesach or not. Perhaps if they're not going to eat the Korban Pesach tonight because they knew the Syrian army is out there and they will be captured, there's no point in shechting the Korban Pesach. But in the end, they decided there's two mitzvahs. One mitzvah is shechting the Korban Pesach, and one mitzvah to eat it. So it doesn't make a difference if they're going to eat it or not. There's still a mitzvah to shecht the Korban Pesach. So they still had time, and they rushed and they shecht the Korban Pesach. When it came to roast the Korban Pesach, they were so worried they didn't take notice that the Korban Pesach got burned. So they were very, very upset. Even if they will have the schia to eat of the Korban Pesach, they will not be able to do the mitzvah, the shleimus, as supposed to be, because the meat of the Korban Pesach is going to be burnt. So they cursed the enemies that they should get burned the same way that their Korban Pesach got burned. This is what happened inside of Yerushalayim. Outside of Yerushalayim was part of Sancheriv's enemy, and Sancheriv was actually told to come and take over the city that day. Chazal tell us the way it should have taken him 10 days, took him 1 day. He comes to Yerushalayim and he comes to Yerushalayim and to a place called Noiv Irakianim, and they built him a platform, and he goes up to the platform so he can have a view on the whole of Yerushalayim, as we can have now a little view of the city, how it looks in these days. And he says, what, for this little city I have waged all these wars? He's so upset about it. And this astrologers tell him, today you have a chance to take the city. You take it, you push it off tomorrow, you will not have a chance. Chazal tell us why. Because it was the sin of the city of Noiv Irakianim, which stood by that if he would take the city on Erev Pesach, Sancheriv would have succeeded in taking down Yerushalayim. But this was only Erev Pesach. On Pesach, things changed. So people told him, should we take the city? He said, what are you talking about? This little city, tomorrow we'll all go and we'll take up each of us a small stone off the wall and we will just take the city. No point. Everyone is tired. Everyone should just go and take a rest. Now, the Yidden at Yerushalayim, they are very worried, whilst the Assyrian forces are very tired. In the Yalkut Shimoni, we find a very interesting thing something very interesting which happened that night. This Rav Shokai was with Sancheriv, and at that night he looked over the city walls and he heard the Yidden saying Hallel. He said to Sancheriv, you can just go back. Tonight they will have some miracles. But Sancheriv did not acknowledge that. He waved his hand against the city of Yerushalayim, against the Har HaMoriah, and he just said, we'll just do it tomorrow. Now, up to now, we have seen all about the happenings of Sancheriv and Yerushalayim from our sources. Now, let's not forget, we have what Sancheriv himself wrote. Let's read how he writes his great siege on Yerushalayim. As for Cheskia, the terrifying splendor of my majesty overcame him, and the Arabs and his mercenary troops, which he had bought to strengthen Yerushalayim, his royal city deserted him, in addition to the 30 talents of gold and the 800 talents of silver, gems, antimony, jewels, large camels, ivory inlaid couches, and all the things he lists over here as you can read. His male and female musicians, as well as his daughters and his harem, his male and female musicians, which he had brought after me to Nineveh, my royal city, to pay tribute and accept servitude, he dispatched his messengers. Now, we see here he writes he received 800 talents of silver, and as we know, he only received 300. Now, this is not the first lie of Sancheriv, because he also writes that he sent down his harem and his daughters as tribute to Sancheriv in Nineveh. At this time, Sancheriv was an alter bucher. He hasn't married yet. As we know, what happened after the story in Tanakh, that he got sick. He was actually sick in these days because of this sin that he did not get married. So I guess one lie led to another lie. And Sancheiriv continues. No, we didn't skip anything over here. Sancheiriv does not say what happens next. He basically put siege on Cheskia. And what happened to the siege? Did it succeed or not? Nothing. The next line in his prism is, in my fourth campaign. He continues his campaigns in some other countries. Obviously, he would not write his defeat on his prism, because we know what happened. That night, an angel of Hashem went out and struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp, and the following morning, they were all dead corpses. He wouldn't write that, would he? Obviously, and they returned in disgrace to his land. And as the Pusik says, with Hashem delivered Cheskia and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from King Sancheiriv of Assyria and from everyone. Thereafter he was exalted in the eyes of all the nations. The next morning, Cheskia Melech, was Pesach night, Cheskia goes out to the city and he finds the Egyptian army. The army was supposed to come and help him. They were all tied together. He finds the dead Assyrian army, and he finds the Egyptian army, and he just releases them, and they go home. And as the Medrash says, they go home, and they tell home all the wonders they saw from Hashem. But eventually, the story changed. And here we have a section of Herodotus writes in his histories about this story of Sancheiriv. He was a king in Egypt, and he went to fight Sancheiriv, and somehow the mice ate up the weapons, and Sancheiriv just had to flee the war. Although it would be very, very interesting, why didn't then the Egyptian army just run after the Syrian army if they were actually defenseless? Obviously, it took the story, which we know what happened, the miracle outside of Jerusalem. We know the Egyptian army was actually captured by Sancheiriv, and they were sent back home. But they understood they have to give credit to their own gods. Now let's go back to the Haggadah. We have now an image, a picture of what happened, the great miracle of Sancheiriv and Yerushalayim Pesach night. Let's translate the words of the Haggadah. Yuatz mechuraif lenoifat ivi hoivashtu fegurav balaylo. Rav Shakeh advised Sancheiriv, who waved his hand over Yerushalayim, over the Beis Hamikdash. You shamed his corpses at night. It's interesting to note, in all the translations I saw of the Haggadah, they refer as Mechorev to Sancheiriv, but as we have seen, it was actually Rav Shakeh, and Lenoifev refers to Sancheiriv. The second night, we come again. Soifi mishman pil ki kavdikoit Pesach. You burned the soldiers of Assyria as the roasting of the roasted Pesach, as mentioned by the Rebbe Mendele, as from Rimanev, that the Jews cursed that the Syrian army should be roasted as the Korban Pesach. And this is the exact translation of the poet. It is interesting to note that the Medrash should find that the way the angel killed the Syrian army was he burned the inside of their bodies, leaving the outside complete. And it did so why? Because Asher is a son of Shem. And because Shem respected Noach when he covered his clothes, therefore, when they killed the Syrian army, they did it in a respectful manner. And in the next verse we say, Oid hayoim benoiv lamoid at go'o oinas Pesach. When Sancheiriv proclaimed a daytime to wait until the next day, the time of Pesach, it is this idea of his, which ended that his defeat. Now, this is the end of the story, but how does this connect with Hallel we say on Pesach and Shul? I found something very interesting. The Gemara asks a question, Masechtas Pesuchim and Arba Pesuchim. And who said this Hallel mentioned in the Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah comes to help. He has an idea. Cheskia and his company recited it when Sancheriv stood against them. The question of the Gemara is that we know David HaMelech did not write the whole of the Tehillim. Who wrote the text of Hallel? And Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, Cheskia is the one who wrote the text of Hallel. And when did he say Hallel for the first time? Pesach night, the night when the miracle of Sancheriv happened. On the other hand, we have here Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoitzadek, Pesach Eve comes to teach us about the fall of Sancheriv and finds himself taught. As Pesach, which we celebrate the miracle of Paroi, requires Hallel, as we all know, we say by the side the Hallel, so does this, the miracle of Sancheriv, require Hallel. We all remember at the beginning of the discussion, we had another saying of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoitzadek. 18 days a year we say Hallel, and one night, the night is Pesach night. We can see how the same Rabbi Shimon ben Yehoitzadek is the one who says